and that Duke Ellington first laid down his eventual jazz standard in a mellow tone. Kent's parents raised him and his brothers in Natchitoches, Louisiana. In adulthood, Kent would remember fondly the beauty of the pine forests that surround that community, as well as the fecundity of the local wildlife. His father was a veterinarian, and the family home was just next door to that practice. Animals were a constant presence in his childhood. From an early age, Kent had a fascination with and a curiosity for and about the natural environment, and about forests in particular. For a time, the idea of serving as a forest ranger seemed to appeal to him, but a summer spent in that work disabused him of that idea. He loved the trees, but not the many insects that came with them. What he eventually found his way to was a life's work that required visiting the forests and studying them, but also spending time in the lab, uncovering the secrets held within these wondrous living things. As a researcher, he was noted for having that crucial gift of turning scientific knowledge into practical application, including, among other things, identifying ways in which white rot fungi could be utilized to address environmental pollutants. His work helping to advance our fundamental understanding of how fungus breaks down wood also led to meaningful use in industry. For this work, he and Carl Erik Erikson were the joint recipients of the Marcus Wallenberg Prize in 1985, an award that I am told, I was not an expert before this, is considered the Nobel Prize of forestry. It is for this reason that Kent's lifetime supply of anecdotes included having once eaten dinner with the King of Sweden. Besides Kent's gifts for the practical, and his just generally being very, very smart and very hardworking, he is remembered by his professional peers for his mentorship and collegiality. It was his common practice to forge connections with other scientists, turning strangers into collaborators and collaborators into friends. In this way, he built connections that lasted the whole remainder of his life. One dear friend and close colleague, Roberta Farrell, Birdie, describes the close bonds Kent formed with an entire circle of colleagues, and how these links continued to grow well after their respective retirements. I'm going to quote her here at some length to give you a taste of how important these relationships were and still are to all involved. She writes, "When Kent told us that he was going to fully retire, it was unthinkable to not spend extended time and often with him. We, Anne and Humin, Pilar and Raphael, Nakatsugu-san and our now absent friends Higuchi-sensei, Hata-san, and Roy, developed our satellite meetings. These times were particularly special with some highlights as follows. Kent organizing fishing trips in Wisconsin, and Humin and Kent preparing the fish afterwards, with Kunio-san and Taka-san caring for Freya-san. Kunio-san organizing a holiday for all of us in Hokkaido, and Higuchi-sensei, Nakatsubo-sensei, and Umizawa-sensei hosting a kaseki meal, and later, Kent and I visiting his favorite gardens in Kyoto. Anne and Humin preparing dumplings while we looked out onto the Emerald Shore. Raphael and Roy watching Anne demonstrate the preparation of aligot in France because Kent wanted a week of eating French food. Kent and I cooking together one of the last times, preparing grits in Mount Pleasant, which he said were almost as good as those he had had as a boy in Louisiana. Snorkeling with Kent in Hawaii and in his beloved Caribbean, and afterwards all of us dancing beside the pool at a house in St. John. Bertie's recollections here point to something else about Kent that we should remark on. He loved to eat, and he loved to feed people, and so he loved to cook. He had a deep affection for beautiful, practical things. My conversation with his daughters about his love of elegant style in architecture, home furnishings, and in his own woodworking left me wondering if that taste was influenced by his time in Sweden, or if it was that taste that drew him to Sweden in the first place. Speaking of those four women whom Kent Kirk was father to, their memories of him include his warmth and his playful humor, as well as his high expectations and his determination to see his children and grandchildren succeed. A brilliant mind who still seemed to be forever looking for a missing glass that he had set down somewhere, all the while holding it in one hand. I will simply offer you all the image of the typewriter in the refrigerator and leave it at that. I did not have the privilege of knowing Kent Kirk when he lived. I wish that I had. The picture painted by some of those who knew him best is a person of great drive and accomplishment who enjoy a wide range of life's offerings, both high and low, humble and exalted. Hearing and reading about him reminded me just a bit of that famous quotation from Henry David Thoreau's Walden. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. Kent Kirk lived deep. And I can think of no more noble epitaph for his or any other life than this. We are going to hear a few remembrances today from some of the folks who knew and loved Kent best. And we're going to begin by hearing from his brother, Jim.
Thank you very much. I'm Jim. I'm Kent's youngest brother. There were three of us. My brother Ben was 2 years younger than Kent. I was 10 years younger. But before I say more, I want to introduce the rest of the crew here. I think you've been introduced to Sharon and Kathy, Sandra, and Katie. Katie's husband, Jeff, his daughter, Haley, his son, Kellen, Alan, who's the husband of Sandra. There'll be a test, of course, on this later. Riley, and his girlfriend, whose name I forget because I'm old. Liv, sorry. And my wife, Kathy. If I'm overlooking anyone, I apologize. You know, in thinking about what to say today, I was concerned that I didn't know everything about my brother Kent. But I can only talk to you from my perspective. And each of you had your own perspectives, you had your own relationships with Kent, and you have your own memories. So anyone could be standing up here giving this little talk from your perspective. But I was invited by his daughters to do this, and I'm very honored and happy to do it. As was mentioned, Kent grew up in the small town of Natchitoches. It's a town in a rural community in Louisiana. It was a town of about 15,000 back when he grew up. And it's not much more than that now. Its claim to fame is that it is the oldest town in the Louisiana Purchase. And it is the home of the writer and filming location of the movie Steel Magnolias. So that's it for Natchitoches. That's the claim to fame. Kent had a difficult beginning in his life. My mom told stories of when he was born, he was very ill. I don't remember why. I don't know if it was his asthma or what, but she would rock him endlessly night after night, hoping that he would, and pray that he would survive. Well, we all know the end of the story. He did survive. He had a long and successful life. Because Kent was 10 years older than me, my memories are somewhat fragmented and frankly are few of his childhood. But we lived on a large piece of land with my dad's veterinary practice and our home. And I remember Ken and Ben playing in the backyard. They made bows and arrows themselves. They varnished the arrows and painted brightly colored bands on them, glued feathers on them. And had a big straw-filled target that they would shoot their bows and arrows at. I don't know if that's at all politically correct anymore, but it was great fun back then. And I remember that at some point in my life, I lost my bow and arrow. My mom assured me that she had no idea what had happened to it. But after I got to be about 50, I finally figured it out. They would jump off of my dad's dog kennels onto a manila rope hung high in a pecan tree in the backyard and swing down. Why I remember that? I don't know, I just do. They would go off in my dad's little wooden boat on the river behind the house and stay gone for hours. Their little 7.5 horsepower Johnson, I can still picture it. And they raised parakeets. I don't know that they ever sold any or even tried to, but they raised parakeets. And Sharon, you're frowning because you didn't know that apparently, but or maybe you did. But they raised parakeets, and that's when Kent began his woodworking career using apple crates from the grocery store. When Kent was a little bit older and got into high school, he became a very strong swimmer. He ran track, and he joined the high school band and played trombone. There's one thing that I always remember from that point in time that has made a big, that really made the relationship between Kent and I. Kent would, of course, as a teenager, would go to the local malt shop, and for those of you that don't remember, it really was like Happy Days. And they would get in the car, or he would, the other teenagers would, and troll around and cruise and go to the teenage hangout. But Kent would sometimes invite me to tag along. And remember, he's 10 years older than me. If he was in high school, that means that he was 16 or 17, perhaps even 15. And I was maybe 6. But he would invite me along. Now, if you're gonna cruise for girls in high school in your dad's station wagon, you probably ought not to also have your little brother in tow. It's just not a recipe for success. But he did, and that not so small act of kindness back then more than once created or helped create the bond that Ken and I had for the rest of our lives. Can't attribute it all to that, certainly, but that was a very important part to me and something I've always remembered. Kent married his high school sweetheart way too young, but good news is he had 3 beautiful daughters, Sharon and Kathy and Sandra, and went on to Louisiana Tech to school, went to NC State, had a postdoc in Gothenburg, Sweden, and eventually found himself in Madison, Wisconsin, with Betty Kay, his wife. They soon divorced, but they remained good friends for the rest of his life. And I often visited Kent over the years. He continued to pursue his passions of woodworking and of music, of food, as was mentioned. We would go to Otto's sometimes here in town and have dinner or drinks on the deck outside if it was pretty weather. We worked in his workshop, or if he was in Louisiana, we'd work in mine. And we would make mistakes and we would laugh about it and nobody would get mad. We'd just find a new piece of wood and start over. Kent was a voracious reader. His favorites were the series of books by John MacDonald, the Travis McGee series. They always involved a good-looking woman, steaks, and some fist fights. The first two were right up Kent's alley. One time when I was visiting Kent, Celeste had planned a trip for us to Devil's Lake, a picnic, and we were going to swim. I know the water's cold in Wisconsin. I didn't realize until then how cold. But I was looking forward to the trip until the point where I saw Kent packing a can of car wax. And not one, but 2 rags. And I quickly figured out one of those rags was probably for me. Kent was a type A personality, and he couldn't sit still even at a picnic. So we waxed the car. Another time I remember that Kent decided he was in dire need of a DR brush cutter. I don't even know if they still make those, but it's sort of like a lawnmower to cut heavy brush. And so we went to Menards or wherever it was, I don't remember, and bought it. And as we were rolling it out to the car, Kent began to think about, well, how are we going to get this thing home? Well, it's no problem. You got a scientist and a lawyer deciding that it would probably be an excellent idea to just hoist it up on top of the roof of the Saab and haul it home. That's what we did. Actually, it worked. I guess that's a tribute to the Swedish Saabs back then. In the mid-'70s, I was visiting Kent here at the Forest Products Lab, and Kent found a greeting card on his desk, and he seemed very happy. Well, in fact, it was from his future wife, love of his life, and Katie's mom, Celeste. They were married in 1976. 5 or 6? Probably 5, I'm sure you know. And Kent added Katie to his entourage of girls. He loved to bicycle. Here we would do that when I would come visit him. And he continued his hobbies and avocation of yard work, food, all the other things he loved, music. Ken and Celeste had literally traveled the world. Their favorite place was an idyllic beach cottage on the island of St. John in St. Martin. Not on St. John, in St. Martin. It had the quintessential hammock stretched between 2 palm trees, between the little house, the little cottage, and the water. And they would rent that pretty much every year. And that was their favorite place. I never saw it. I guess Ken had decided to not let me come with him by that time. Kent was, as mentioned, a gourmet cook. He loved French food, but when he cooked for family or friends, he pretty much would cook Louisiana gumbo or his favorite, shrimp creole. And he had put away his trombone decades before, but he continued as was mentioned, to love music. He introduced me to Billie Holiday, Diana Krall, Eva Cassidy, and others. And he loved blues and jazz. He and Celeste would sometimes go to the south side of Chicago, which is sort of a brave thing to do, I think, even back then, and listen to blues and jazz. He liked to fish. He was not a fisherman all his life, but he became a fisherman of sorts, and he fished here in Wisconsin, as was also mentioned. He would fish with his friend Tom in Florida, offshore, for redfish and trout and whatever else might bite their line. And he was, of course, a Badger and Packers fan, which I suppose is sort of required if you're going to live here. By all accounts, Kent was a wonderful son, father, husband, grandfather, and I learned today, great-grandfather. He was dedicated to his family and to his schnauzers, Frenny first and then Pippi later. He would always chastise me if I accidentally called her Pee-Pee, but sometimes that was appropriate. And he continued to be dedicated to his woodworking, and most of all to science, which to Kent was the very highest order in the universe. He had honesty, he had unflinching integrity, ethics and morals. He would make me think, he would make me laugh, he was witty, and he loved satire. Every year he would send me for my birthday a birthday card with, of course, the Far Side of it. Most of all, Kent was my friend, and I miss him terribly. Many of you know his penchant for nicknames. I'm not sure how much of that was just within the family and how much of it maybe was with colleagues and co-workers. But he would call me Magoo or Farnsworth or Goat Roper, whatever came to mind, and he could think up those names instantly. And that's just the way he was. He would intentionally misname some things just as a joke. For example, he would say, "I'm going to go get my socks out of the dishwasher." Same with the typewriter and the refrigerator. That's all very true, very real. But one affectation that Kent had that I think most all of you will recognize are his asides. He would lean over and in a conspiratorial whisper say, "Jim, I think on the way home we should stop at the market and get some tomatoes." As if it was the greatest secret in the world. And as if anyone overheard us, there would surely be a run on tomatoes in that. An 18th century Scottish poet named Thomas Campbell famously observed that to live in the hearts of those we leave behind is to never die. Our memories of Kent will keep him alive for each of us. I want to thank Kent's daughters for putting this celebration together. His caregivers, if any, are here, even if they're not, for their patience and persistence. Most of all, to you, his friends, colleagues, co-workers, and Kent would have greatly appreciated your being here enough and caring enough to be here. At this point, Kent would no doubt say, "Well, there you have it."
We will next hear from Kent's friend and colleague, Ming Tian.
First of all, I want to thank the Kirk family for asking me to do this. It's quite the honor, quite a task. I was here in Madison, Wisconsin from 82 to 85. And the 3 short years there basically made my career. So as I'm coming here, all these things are kind of popping up in my head that Kent would say are things that went on. I still remember after my dad passed away, we chatted on the phone, and he said, well, Ming, you know, we're at the front of the line now. We're no longer waiting. So whoever's going next, it's you know, it's us. So indeed now, Kent's passed. And it's just weird, I just thought of that the other day. But in any case, I'm going to try to describe Kent's contribution to science so that the general public, the family, can understand it. All right? I'm going to break it down into 3 areas. I'm going to try to explain what he did, which was monumental, right? And I'll tell you why. I also want to explain to you the conditions which he did it. He did not do it in everybody's idea of what science is all about. Big labs, millions and millions of dollars, and training tons of people. Kent pretty much did this on his own. And finally, and most importantly, I want to cover his relationships with the people he worked with. If this was all just a discussion about his accomplishments, we could just read his CV. But what he leaves at the end is a legacy of interactions and friendships. And you've already heard a bit of that from the Reverend. And you can also witness that by the people that are here, how far they've traveled. Raphael came up from South America. I'm not sure, but that may be the furthest place anybody came. So let me try to quickly go through his career, right? He got his bachelor's degree and PhD from NC State. And he worked under 2 really famous scientists, Arthur Kelman and Alice Culling. First, I want to explain to you what Alice Culling said when he came to Penn State, which is where I was at for whatever years, about science. And this is very true. He said, you know, the biochemists look down on the biologists and microbiologists. And Kent was very much aware of that. He always thought these chemists and biochemists were assholes. So, and he was true, he was right. And the chemists, in turn, would look down on the biochemist. And the physicists, in turn, would look down on the chemist. And mathematicians would look down on the physicists. And Ellis said, it's really a continuum. There's no hierarchy. The biologists are the ones that inform the biochemist what they should work on. They're the ones out there discovering the new microbes, what have you, out there in biology. Then the biochemists will break it down and characterize what is going on a molecular level. Then we would hand it off then to the chemist, who could then understand it in much deeper detail. All right? I don't even know what the physicists do, but in any case, it's these disciplines, at least in the days that Kent was trained, there were big, tall walls between microbiology and biochemistry and chemistry. That's kind of changed a bit over the last 34 years. Those walls have come down a bit, but those walls are still there. The point I want to make here is that Kent, I'm not sure when this interest started, was curious about how nature broke down lignin, all right, which is a biological question. And he was able to take that question through biology, through microbiology, through chemistry, through biochemistry, and then at the end of his career, molecular biology and cloning genes was coming around, and he was able to address those issues. So after getting his PhD, I don't remember exactly what, was it plant physiology, but he was basically in the biological realm. To study lignin, and lignin is a real bear to work with, he went to Sweden to do postdoc, I think for 3 years, and anyone that's out there could correct me, especially you, Ken Hamill, to work with a lignin chemist named Eric Adler. And lignin chemistry is just not like chemistry. It's really bizarre science. I'll get into that a little bit later, because I always found lignin chemists to be the weirdest people. Right? So after being in Sweden, which the Reverend brought up, he came back and got a job at Forest Products Lab. And there is, of course, where he stayed for the rest of his career. But he kept on pursuing this curiosity about how lignin is degraded. I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, and I asked him and the new intern, have you guys ever heard of lignin? And they said no. So I told them it's about 20 to 30% of all the carbons that's fixed by photosynthesis. And nobody really studies it in the K through 12 or even in university education. It's the brown stuff here. It's what they take out of wood to make it into paper. And if you go for a walk in the woods, and this is where Kent started, you would see that there are mushrooms growing out of the side of these dead logs. Well, these are fungi, okay? And it's obvious that the nature, what degrades lignin in nature are fungi. So what's the next leap, okay? The next leap then is, how can we study this in the laboratory? So Kent had to isolate pure cultures of fungi, Phanerochedium chrysosporium bird for birdsong right there, okay? And then you couldn't just grow these fungi in the lab. You give them plenty of nutrients, they wouldn't degrade lignin. So he had to be a microbiologist now to get the culture conditions. Then at the same time, he had to be a chemist. He figured out how to synthesize radioactive lignin. So when the fungus degraded it, it would blow it off as CO2. So he would trap radioactive CO2 as a measurement of when the activity started. So they found out, and this is through collaborations with that fellow there, Tom Jeffries, you had to starve these fungi. When they were happy, they wouldn't degrade lignin. And why would you? If you're sitting on a piece of wood and there's plenty of cellulose, you're just going to go ahead and chew up the cellulose. You ran out of cellulose, you had to figure out how to get across this lignin barrier. So there he was with his microbiology hat. The other way to describe this, the analogy, is that to get a PhD, you really need to go in depth into a certain area. So after you go in depth, you got your little hammer, which you can pound nails. And many people can sit there with the same hammer and keep on pounding the nails that somebody gives them. For him to do what he was doing, he had to put one hammer down, pick up another one, and pound another nail. So what he did, and I'm still going to describe more of this, was monumental. People just don't do this anymore. And being at Forest Products Lab also allowed him to do this. Everything's got its yins and yangs and pros and cons. I'm telegraphing what I'm going to say later on. Never had a big research group. If you go into the big labs at Harvard and MIT, these people have armies of 20, 30 people. When I was there, I think Kent only had 3 or 4 people. And through this whole career at a place that didn't necessarily reward you for high productivity, all right? He was a driven scientist. And I still remember him telling me, well, Celeste would go to bed around 10. I used to go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 6. He said, well, I just decided to go to bed. When Celeste went to bed, 10 o'clock, wake up at 2. He'd be working from 2 o'clock to like 7 or 8. I'd be barely getting out of bed at 8 o'clock. And so that's Kent Kirk. So Kent, having the hammer of the microbiologist, then set up the conditions to ask the biochemical questions, which is and are, what are the enzymes involved? We know that organism's doing what it's doing, but what's going on in the organism? And these are called enzymes. So he was setting the stage up to do the biochemistry. Lignin, if you've never seen the structure, it's okay. Just think of it as chicken wire. All right? So to do biochemistry, you can't just try to characterize small chemical changes and large ugly polymer. So in his wisdom, he decided to simplify the problem and make these small so-called models of lignin. He did that by going to Japan and doing a sabbatical with Higuchi. I'm not sure who else was there, but you guys out there, some of you guys know more than me as far as the details, please chime in. But I think he spent a year there. And then Higuchi and him, Higuchi's name has already been mentioned. So these are the relationships he has with people he works with. So he came back with the lignin model compounds. He already did which is now chemistry again, okay? So he's going back and forth. Now, he already did the microbiology. He figured out how to get these cultures to degrade this compound. So now the table was set for the biochemistry. That's where I came in 1982. And talk about the table being set and me being lucky. Within the first year, we had the results that resulted in a publication in Science, all right? And I want to quote Ken Hamill there. So it spawned an entirely new research field. Thousands of subsequent publications have explored the lignin-degrading enzyme produced by diverse wood-degrading fungi. So it really did explode, all right? And this discovery really was the pinnacle and highlight of what, 30, 40 years of effort. And he got recognized for the Marcus Wallenberg Prize, but with the people I run with, he got into the National Academy, and that's like holy territory. And, but Kent didn't stop there, okay? Kent always remembered who paid the rent, the taxpayers. So he always had his mind or his foot or his finger in the applied area. Kent utilized the fungus for cleaning up of pulp and paper waste. He also, that was with Holman Chang, all right? I forgot to mention Holman was integral in working with Kent to describe the initial reactions in the lignin polymer. It was all oxidative. And then the ability of the fungus to degrade paper pulp mill lignin also resulted in the use of the fungus in degrading environmental pollutants. Rich Lamar is here that worked with Kent to get that area going. But, so his energy was endless. This, as I mentioned before, was really the beginning of the biotech era. And I say I'm probably the last generation of biochemists that didn't learn how to clone genes. So Kent, being the generation above me, certainly didn't. Did that stop him? So he ended up working with Roberta Farrell, Birdie. And if you guys have met Birdie, she's, as her advisor said, she's worth the cover charge, okay? She's high energy and can't help the biotech company she was with to clone the lignin degrading gene. He also helped them, and I'm not sure of all the relationships, but what's that process they have? CardiPip? To come up with a biopulping method. So instead of using harsh chemicals at high temperature, they wanted to be able to use the enzyme or the fungus to enzymatically, biologically remove lignin from the polymer. So I hope I didn't forget anybody here that contributed, but let's now go to the phase where, okay, I've already talked about how difficult it was for him to do this at the Forest Products Lab. He didn't have a big operation, all right? And for him to single-handedly shepherd this whole field to where it got was pretty amazing. And along the way, of course, he was smart enough and wise enough to pick really good people to work with. Some of them are in this audience. Rafael Vicuña in Chile, they collaborated and had a long collaboration. I could describe Rafael in many ways. The best way I can describe is, I'm not sure who told me this story. It could have been Ken Hamill. So working at the government lab, you get visitors all the time. And it becomes a pain in the butt. So I guess Raphael showed up, wanted to see Kent. And I think it was Ken Hamill said, he set aside half an hour for Raphael. Raphael ended up spending the whole day with Kent. And the rest is history, all right? And I know you guys have collaborations where you guys are going back and forth from Chile to Madison, Wisconsin. Madison was the epicenter for what we call the lignin eaters, all right? So I think I've covered just the people and the ties he has, okay? So I mentioned Rich, all right, I want to say this about Ken Hamill. Ken Hamill came a year after I came. And I'll never say this again, Ken, but Ken is an amazing scientist, okay? So, and I'm not sure if he's carried on the work of Kent as far as understanding biological lignin degradation, but he also has made monumental contributions. So I want to bring up again, I didn't know there were that many people that were invited to these retreats. And to be honest with you, I was always jealous that I was left out. But I just want to say, I have a saying, not everybody that leaves my lab after working with me hates me, the most do. Right? So, and there's nobody that I think I ever worked with that would want to spend a day with me after we retired. This is also very different about my father. My father would have his colleagues, after he passed away, come to State College and visit my mom, my dad's wife. And not that I have a wife to make into a widow, but I guarantee you, if I did, again, ain't nobody coming to State College to visit a widow, all right? But let me quote again Ken Hamill, who wrote the obituary. My name's on there for whatever reason. So I want to address this part, and Kent also wanted to obviously address this part. The quote is, although he occasionally ruffled the feathers of some, he was a man genuinely without pretense. So you got what you got from Kent Kirk, okay? And Kent, of course, was the big alpha dog, all right? I was the young kid, and I didn't like having an alpha dog around, so I always give him a hard time. All right, he didn't have to pound his chest, but I would go there and try to pound my chest louder, right? So eventually, one of us would have to leave, and Kent wasn't leaving. So anyway, how I want to wrap that part up is, it only took years later, after my dad passed away, and all these emails and letters came in, that it really dawned on me, my dad's closest friends were his bosses, even all the way back to the bottle factory in Taiwan in his 20s. His major professor, all these people. That kind of made me look at myself as far as my relationships with my mentors. Then I realized, you know, man, you can be a little bit more true about this, because I kind of left in a huff and a puff, wanting to make the name for myself. And in that regard, what Ken said to me, which was his biggest compliment, is, Ming, and this is referring to my negative personality traits, you remind me of myself when I was young. So in any case, Ken kind of saw it at his stage, but again, after reflecting on what Kent had done for my career, that's when I wanted to organize that symposium, to kind of thank him and acknowledge him. What he's done for my career, it took me a career to recognize. I would not be where I am or was if it wasn't for Kent. And I was happy and lucky to ride that wave when it was breaking, that Kent basically generated. That's it.